Some women scream when their marriages end. Others hire armies of lawyers and fight for every last penny. But Marcus Brennan, standing in the 45th floor conference room of Sterling
You did it! The
Aerospace
deal is
headquarters
finally
in
closed!
downtown
Incredible
Dayton,
work. Just need these signatures.
did neither.
Outstanding. Let's finish
Yes, to the
when
future.
his wife of 5 years slid the divorce papers across the mahogany table, papers that would strip him of everything except his name, he didn't shed a tear. He didn't call for a recess. He didn't even reach for the phone to find legal representation. He just asked one question: where do I sign? The August heat outside pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, distorting the view of the Miami River below. Inside, the air conditioning hummed at a temperature cold enough to preserve both contracts and cruelty. Victoria Sterling sat at the head of the table, her posture immaculate in a charcoal Armani suit that cost more than Marcus made in a month. To her right, Adrian Blackwell shuffled through documents with the efficient boredom of a woman who had dismantled stronger men than the one sitting across from her. To Victoria's left, General James Harding leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, the hint of a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. 3 stars retired, 62 years old, and recently appointed to Sterling's board of directors. The affair had been going on for 8 months. Marcus had known for 6. Victoria's manicured fingers drummed once against the table. You understand what you're signing, Marcus? You're walking away with nothing. No claim to the house, no division of assets, no alimony. Marcus looked down at the papers. 23 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple truth. He had failed at the one thing that mattered more than engineering, more than service, more than the 28 years he'd given to Sterling Aerospace. He had failed to see the woman he married for who she actually was. I understand. He wore a Carhartt work jacket over a clean flannel shirt, Red Wing boots that had seen 17 years of hangar floors and tarmac. His hands, scarred from a decade of prototyping and testing, looked out of place against the expensive paper, but they were steady. Adrian slid a Mont Blanc pen across the table. Initial here, here, and here. Full signature on page 23. The hallway outside held a figure neither Marcus nor Victoria noticed. Emily Brennan pressed her back against the wall, 17 years old and trembling, her MIT acceptance letter folded in the front pocket of her backpack. She had come to surprise her father with the news, to show him that all his sacrifices had meant something. Instead, she watched through the slim gap in the doorway as he signed away their home, their savings, the future he had built brick by brick after her mother died. The pen scratched across paper, 3 initials, 1 signature. Victoria's expression shifted, confusion bleeding through the mask of control. She had expected resistance. She had prepared for Marcus to fight, to demand his share of the company he had helped build, to leverage his position as the lead propulsion engineer who had designed the breakthrough that was about to make Sterling Aerospace a top-tier defense contractor. Instead, he capped the pen and placed it back on the table. Is that all? General Harding's smirk widened. Going back to the hangar, Brennan? Maybe you can get a job turning wrenches at some regional outfit. Here they're always looking for mechanics. Marcus stood. The chair didn't scrape. He had learned silence in the Air Force during 16 years of service that had taken him from Lackland to Al Udeid and back to civilian life with a chest full of commendations and a skill set that translated to exactly one thing: making aircraft engines that didn't fail at 40,000 feet. He turned toward the door, then paused. Good luck with the Air Force contract. I hope the fuel efficiency tests go well. The room froze. Victoria's fingers stopped drumming. Adrian looked up from her documents. General Harding's smirk evaporated. How do you know about the Air Force contract? But Marcus was already walking, his boots silent on the carpet, past the receptionist who had known him for a decade, past the framed photographs of aircraft he had helped engineer, past his daughter, who stepped into a doorway before he could see her tears. The elevator doors closed on a man who had given everything and received nothing, except the one thing Victoria hadn't thought to take: the truth. 6 years earlier, Marcus Brennan had been a different kind of silent. Not the silence of a man walking away from a marriage, but the silence of a widower who woke at 3 a.m. to check if his 11-year-old daughter was still breathing. Cancer had taken Rebecca on a Tuesday in April, and for months afterward, Marcus had lived in a world where every sound was too loud, and every silence was the prelude to discovering Emily had stopped existing too. Work became the only language he could speak. Hangar 7 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base smelled like jet fuel and possibility. The SB-47 Ranger sat on the test stand, a turbofan engine that Marcus and his team had spent 4 years developing. The breakthrough was in the blade geometry, a modification so subtle that most engineers had dismissed it as inconsequential. But Marcus had run the computational fluid dynamics models 647 times, adjusting angles by fractions of a degree, until he found the sweet spot. 22% fuel efficiency improvement over the current generation. The test observer, a lieutenant colonel whose name Marcus had forgotten in the years since, stood beside the control station. "You sure about this, Brennan? If those blades shatter at high RPM, we're looking at $1 million of scrap metal and a safety investigation that'll bury Sterling for years." Marcus's fingers moved across the keyboard, finalizing the test parameters. "The math works, sir. I verified it 300 times. Math doesn't fly planes." "No, sir, but it keeps them in the air." The engine spooled up, the whine building from a whisper to a roar that rattled the hangar walls. Turbine speed climbed, 5,000 RPM, 10,000, 15,000. The blades blurred into a silver disk. Fuel flow meters tracked consumption in real time, numbers scrolling across monitors that Marcus had memorized before the test even began. At maximum thrust, the efficiency gain hit 22.3%. The lieutenant colonel whistled. "Jesus, Brennan, you just saved the taxpayers $2 billion over the next decade." But Marcus was staring at the temperature readings, at the vibration sensors, at the pressure differential across the combustion chamber. The numbers told a story that went beyond money. Longer range meant rescue missions could reach farther. Better efficiency meant cargo planes could carry more supplies to troops downrange. Quieter operation meant pilots had a better chance of surviving in hostile airspace. This wasn't about contracts or quarterly earnings. This was about bringing people home. Victoria Sterling had watched the test from the observation deck. She was 39 then, the newly appointed VP of Engineering, a woman who had clawed her way up through a defense industry that still treated female executives like affirmative action checkboxes. Her father had founded Sterling Aerospace, but she had transformed it from a regional parts supplier into a company bidding on prime contracts. She found Marcus in the break room 2 hours later, drinking coffee that had been sitting on the burner since 0600. "Who designed the blade modifications?" "Me and my team, ma'am. Took 4 years to get it right." Victoria sat down across from him. She wore slacks and a blouse that were professional without being severe, and her eyes carried the kind of intelligence that made Marcus forget to breathe. "It's brilliant. You're brilliant." "I just followed the math. The math doesn't follow itself. You saw something no one else did." She leaned forward. "Have dinner with me. I want to understand how you think." Marcus had learned caution in the years since Rebecca died. Women approached him sometimes, drawn to the quiet intensity that he wore like a uniform. But they left when they realized he came with an 11-year-old daughter and a heart that was still learning to beat in a world without the woman who had been his center of gravity. "I appreciate it, ma'am, but I'm not really the dinner type. I've got a daughter at home and I work 60-hour weeks. So bring her. We'll make it an early dinner, pizza, something a kid would like." Victoria's smile was genuine then, untainted by the ambition that would later corrode everything it touched. I don't bite, Marcus. I just like men who build things instead of managing them. There aren't many of us left. The courtship happened in increments. Dinner became dinners. Emily, wary at first, softened when Victoria showed up to her 7th grade science fair and asked questions about the baking soda volcano that were actually thoughtful. Marcus found himself talking about Rebecca without the crushing weight of grief, about the way she had believed in his engineering even when he was designing parts for crop dusters. Victoria listened. She asked questions. She seemed to understand that some silences were sacred. By the time she proposed, Marcus had convinced himself that love could happen twice in one lifetime. The wedding was small, held at the VFW Hall in Fairborn on a Saturday in October. Emily served as maid of honor in a dress she had picked out herself. Marcus's Air Force buddies showed up in their dress blues, men who had deployed with him to Afghanistan and Iraq, who had watched him grieve and now watched him try to live again. Victoria's side of the hall held business associates and board members, people who shook Marcus's hand with the polite distance of those who couldn't understand why their VP was marrying a man who still drove a 15-year-old F-150. The prenuptial agreement came up 3 weeks before the ceremony. Victoria's lawyer had drafted it, a document that was precise in its brutality. All assets acquired before the marriage remained separate. All intellectual property created during the marriage belonged to Sterling Aerospace, given that Marcus was an employee. In the event of divorce, there would be no alimony, no division of marital assets, no claim to stock options or executive compensation. Marcus read it once. "You want me to sign this?" Victoria's voice was gentle, the kind of gentle that sounds like reason. "It protects what I've built. You understand that, don't you? My father left me this company. I need to make sure it stays in the family. I'm about to be family. You know what I mean. It's just a formality. We're not going to get divorced." "Then why do we need it?" "Because the board requires it. They won't approve our marriage otherwise. They see you as a potential liability, someone who could claim ownership of company assets down the line." Marcus looked at Emily, who was watching from the kitchen doorway, her face a mixture of hope and fear that she was about to lose another parent. He signed without reading the rest. It was the second worst decision of his life. The first was trusting that Victoria had married him for reasons that had nothing to do with the engine designs locked inside his head. The first 3 years were good. Marcus continued designing, his reputation growing beyond Sterling Aerospace to the wider defense community. Victoria became CEO when her father retired, and the promotion came with longer hours, late-night calls, weekends spent in Washington lobbying for contracts. Marcus compensated by being present for Emily, by showing up to parent-teacher conferences and volleyball games, by making sure that at least one parent remembered she existed. The cracks appeared in year 4. Victoria stopped asking about his work. She stopped listening when he talked about the new project, the one that was going to revolutionize military transport aviation. She started talking about him in the third person, even when he was in the room. "My lead engineer thinks we can cut fuel consumption by 30%. My team is developing a lighter composite housing. My company is positioning for the Air Force's next generation contract." Never his name. Never his contribution. Just her possessive pronouns, claiming ownership of everything he created. The engine that would destroy their marriage and save his integrity was designated RB-71, Pegasus. Marcus had started the design in year 3, working late nights after Emily went to bed, filling notebooks with calculations that built on everything he had learned from the Ranger. The breakthrough was a combination of factors: optimized blade geometry that reduced parasitic drag, an improved combustion chamber that maximized fuel burn efficiency, and a composite housing that cut weight without sacrificing structural integrity. 18% lighter, 30% more efficient, 50% quieter. The Air Force was developing a new stealth transport, an aircraft designed to insert special operations teams deep into hostile territory without detection. They needed an engine that was powerful, efficient, and whisper quiet. The contract was worth $4.7 billion over 15 years. Pegasus was the answer. Victoria recognized it before Marcus finished the first prototype. She started inviting him to board meetings, asking him to present to investors, parading him in front of Air Force procurement officers like evidence that Sterling had the engineering talent to deliver on impossible promises. Marcus hated the attention, but he endured it because the engine was bigger than his discomfort. If Pegasus worked, soldiers would come home, missions would succeed, lives would be saved. That was worth a few hours of corporate theater. General James Harding entered the picture in year 4, brought on as a board advisor after his retirement from active duty. He had spent 35 years in the Air Force, the last 10 in positions that interfaced with defense contractors. His Rolodex was worth more than his salary, and his endorsement could fast-track procurement approvals that usually took years. Victoria introduced him to Marcus at a company reception. "General, this is my husband, Marcus Brennan. He's the lead engineer on Pegasus." Harding's handshake was firm, his smile practiced. "I've heard good things, Brennan. The Air Force is watching this project closely." "Thank you, sir. We're doing everything we can to meet the specifications. Just make sure you do. A lot of people are counting on you." The general's attention shifted back to Victoria, and Marcus recognized the look. He had seen it before, the way men assessed Victoria not as a CEO, but as a woman they wanted to conquer. Usually, Victoria shut it down with the kind of cold precision that made admirals apologize. Marcus discovered it on a Thursday in November, coming home early from the hangar because Emily had a stomach bug and the school needed someone. Marcus stood in the hallway, his hand on the doorknob to Emily's room where she was sleeping off the fever, and listened to his wife plan his destruction. "When you file the patent for Pegasus, use my name as co-inventor." Victoria's voice carried the hesitation of someone who still had a conscience, buried deep but not quite dead. "Why? Marcus designed it. Every calculation, every test, every refinement, it's his work. The Air Force trusts generals, not mechanics, and I'll make sure procurement fast-tracks the approval if my name is on the patent. You want this contract or not?" "Of course I want it. Sterling needs it. Then you need me on that patent. And you need to get rid of the mechanic." "Marcus is my husband." "For now. But that prenup you had him sign? It says all intellectual property belongs to Sterling, which means it belongs to you. File for divorce after the patent goes through. He gets nothing. We get everything." The silence that followed was the sound of Victoria choosing ambition over honor. What about Emily? He didn't confront Victoria. He set up a camera in the hangar workshop, ostensibly for safety documentation, but positioned to capture him working alone on the calculations that Victoria would later claim as her own. He recorded conversations using an app on his phone that Victoria never thought to check. He compiled notebooks, 7 volumes of handwritten calculations that showed the evolution of the design from concept to completion. He created a paper trail so thorough that no lawyer, no matter how skilled, could argue it away. And when Victoria filed for divorce in June, 8 months after Marcus had discovered the affair, he acted surprised. He hired no lawyer. He made no demands. He signed the papers she put in front of him. Papers that stripped him of the house they had shared, the savings account he had contributed to, the car he had bought before they married. He took nothing except his F-150, his tools, and the boxes of documentation that he had labeled as old engineering files, and moved to a storage unit in Fairborn. Victoria thought she had won. She had no idea the game had changed. Sterling Aerospace occupied a sprawling complex on the northern edge of Dayton, a collection of hangars and office buildings that represented 3 generations of manufacturing excellence. Victoria's father had founded the company in 1978, building parts for commercial aviation at a time when Dayton was still trying to reclaim its legacy as the birthplace of flight. By the time Victoria took over, Sterling had pivoted to defense contracts, specializing in propulsion systems and avionics that kept the military flying. Revenue had grown to $380 million annually, respectable but not dominant. The company employed 460 people, most of them engineers and machinists who had spent their entire careers in the Miami Valley. Victoria had transformed the culture, bringing in MBA-trained managers and consultants who talked about synergies and vertical integration, pushing out the old guard who remembered when the company Christmas party was held in someone's backyard. Marcus had survived the purges because his engines worked. Victoria needed him, at least until Pegasus was complete. Now, 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, she was preparing to erase him from the story entirely. The patent application sat on her desk, black text on white paper that represented the culmination of Marcus's career. United States Patent Application number 11247-893. Title: Advanced Turbofan Engine with Optimized Blade Geometry and Composite Housing. Inventors: Victoria Sterling, General James Harding. Marcus Brennan's name appeared nowhere. Adrian reviewed the document, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "You're sure about this? If he challenges it, we'll have to prove you contributed to the design." Victoria's office overlooked the main hangar, where technicians were assembling the Pegasus prototype for final testing. Through the window, she could see the engine taking shape, a sculpture of titanium and composite materials that would either secure Sterling's future or bankrupt the company. The prenup is clear. All IP created during the marriage belongs to Sterling. I own Sterling. Therefore, I own the design. He has no legal claim. That's not what I asked. Victoria turned from the window. Marcus worked for me. I directed the project. I secured the funding. I negotiated the Air Force contract. Yes, he did the math, but engineers do math. That's what we pay them for. And the general? Harding brings credibility. The Air Force trusts him. His endorsement will fast-track procurement, cut months off the approval timeline. Adding his name to the patent is strategic. It's also fraud if he didn't actually contribute to the invention. Victoria's smile was ice. He contributed strategic guidance. That counts. The patent was filed on a Wednesday. By Friday, the Air Force had scheduled a preliminary review. By the following Monday, General Harding was on a call with the procurement office, explaining how his decades of experience in military aviation had informed the Pegasus design, how his understanding of operational requirements had shaped the specifications. The lie was polished smooth. Marcus found out through an email that wasn't meant for him, a message forwarded by mistake from one of the junior engineers who still respected the man who had mentored him through his first turbofan design. The subject line was simple: patent filing confirmation. He read it in his apartment, a 2-bedroom unit in a complex near the Fairborn Town Square. Emily was at volleyball practice, giving him 90 minutes to absorb the magnitude of Victoria's betrayal before he had to put on the mask of a father who had everything under control. The apartment was furnished with second-hand pieces from Goodwill and the VFW's donation center. The F-150 sat in the parking lot, rust spreading along the wheel wells, the engine burning oil at a rate that suggested a rebuild was 6 months overdue. His bank account held $12,000, the remnants of a savings plan that had been gutted to pay for Emily's SAT prep courses and college application fees. The MIT acceptance letter sat on the kitchen counter, a beautiful reminder of everything he couldn't afford. Cost of attendance, $79,000 per year. Financial aid offered, $19,000. Gap, $60,000, multiplied by 4 years. $240,000. It might as well have been $2 million. The patent listed Victoria and General Harding as inventors. The patent that represented 4 years of Marcus's life, 600 nights of staying late at the hangar, 800 pages of calculations. The patent that was supposed to save lives, that was supposed to mean something beyond quarterly earnings and stock prices. They had stolen it. But they had made a mistake. They thought Marcus would stay silent. The Wright-Patterson Air Force Base Technical Review Board convened on the second Thursday of August, 6 weeks after the patent filing and 42 days after Victoria had watched Marcus sign away his rights to everything except his integrity. The meeting was standard procedure, a formality required before the Air Force could issue a contract worth billions. 3 colonels, 2 civilian engineers, and a JAG lawyer would review the Pegasus specifications, verify that Sterling Aerospace could deliver what they promised, and sign off on procurement. Victoria had prepared for weeks. PowerPoint slides were polished to perfection. Test data was organized into binders that weighed 5 pounds each. General Harding had rehearsed his talking points, the narrative of how his military experience had identified the operational gap that Pegasus would fill. What Victoria hadn't prepared for was Marcus Brennan filing a formal challenge with the Air Force Contracting Office. The notification arrived via email at 0700 on the morning of the review. Subject: Patent Challenge. U.S. Patent Application 11,247,893. Complainant: Marcus J. Brennan, former lead propulsion engineer, Sterling Aerospace. Allegation: fraudulent inventor attribution. Request for independent technical review. Victoria read it 3 times, her coffee going cold in the expensive ceramic mug that Marcus had given her for their 2nd anniversary. He's bluffing. Adrian looked up from her own copy of the email. Is he? He has nothing, no proof, just the bitterness of a man who lost everything in a divorce. He has 28 years of engineering documentation. He has notebooks, I've seen them, 7 volumes, every calculation time-stamped and signed. Those are company property. Are they? Did you ever formally confiscate them? Did you include them in the asset division during the divorce? Adrian's silence was answer enough. General Harding leaned back in his chair, unconcerned. Let him file his complaint. The Air Force won't delay a $4.7 billion contract because some mechanic is upset about his divorce. We'll present, they'll approve, and Brennan can spend the next 5 years in litigation if he wants. But Victoria's hands were shaking, a tremor she couldn't quite control. What if they believe him? They won't. I'll make sure of it. The hearing was scheduled for 1400 hours in Building 17, Conference Room C. It was a space designed for bureaucratic efficiency, not drama. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, a conference table large enough to seat 20. The Air Force panel sat on one side, their uniforms and civilian suits a study in military precision. Victoria, Adrian, General Harding, and 2 of Sterling's senior engineers sat on the other. At 13:55, Marcus Brennan walked in. He wore khakis and a button-down shirt, pressed but not expensive. The Air Force veteran baseball cap was a detail that made 2 of the colonels sit up straighter. He carried a banker's box, the kind lawyers use for discovery documents, and set it on the table with the care of a man who knew exactly what each piece of paper represented. Emily followed him, 17 and terrified, her MIT acceptance letter folded in her pocket like a talisman. Victoria's voice came out sharper than she intended. What is he doing here? Colonel Sarah Vance, the senior officer on the panel, looked up from her notes. Mr. Brennan filed a formal challenge under Air Force Acquisition Regulation 33.103. He has the right to present evidence. This is a technical review, not a courtroom. The colonel's expression suggested she had presided over worse. Mr. Brennan alleges patent fraud on a contract worth $4.7 billion taxpayer dollars. We're going to hear him out. You'll get your turn, Miss Sterling. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she sat. The colonel nodded to Victoria. Let's begin with the patent holders. Miss Sterling, General Harding, please present your technical overview of the Pegasus engine. Victoria stood, triggering the first slide. It was a cutaway diagram of the RB-71, rendered in high-definition detail that made the engine look like sculpture. She had rehearsed this presentation 40 times, refining every word, every pause, every gesture. Distinguished panel, the Pegasus engine represents a quantum leap in military propulsion technology. General Harding and I have spent the last 18 months developing a turbofan system that achieves unprecedented efficiency, reduced weight, and near-silent operation. She clicked to the next slide. Performance specifications. Compared to current generation engines, Pegasus delivers 18% weight reduction, 30% improvement in fuel efficiency, and 50% reduction in acoustic signature. These improvements translate directly to operational capability, longer range, higher payload capacity, and reduced detectability in contested environments. One of the civilian engineers raised a hand. Ms. Sterling, can you explain how you achieved the blade geometry optimization? That's typically the most challenging aspect of turbofan design. Victoria's answer was textbook perfect because it was literally from a textbook. She described computational fluid dynamics, iterative testing, advanced materials, all true, all accurate, all information that Marcus had explained to her. In meetings she had recorded for training purposes. We used CFD modeling to identify optimal blade angles, then validated through wind tunnel testing and full-scale prototype evaluation. The key insight was recognizing that traditional symmetrical blade designs create unnecessary vortex formation at high RPM. By introducing a 3-degree asymmetry at the trailing edge, we delayed vortex onset beyond operational parameters. The engineer nodded, satisfied. General Harding added his piece, talking about operational requirements and mission profiles, painting a picture of how military experience had informed engineering decisions. It was convincing, the kind of narrative that procurement officers loved because it connected technology to tactics. Victoria finished with a flourish, confident that she had sealed the approval. Thank you for your time. We're ready to answer any technical questions you might have. Colonel Vance made a note, then looked at Marcus. Mr. Brennan, you have the floor. Marcus stood slowly, his movements economical. He didn't have slides. He didn't have a rehearsed script. He had 7 notebooks, a USB drive full of video files, and a voice that carried the weight of 28 years in hangars where precision was the difference between life and death. Colonels, ma'am, gentlemen, my name is Marcus Brennan. I worked at Sterling Aerospace for 28 years. I designed the Pegasus engine. Not co-designed, designed. Victoria was on her feet before he finished the sentence. That's a lie. He's a disgruntled ex-employee trying to sabotage. Colonel Vance's voice cut through the room like a blade. Miss Sterling, sit down. Mr. Brennan, your evidence? Marcus opened the first notebook, a composition book with a black and white cover that had been filled during late nights in 2019. The handwriting was his, cramped and precise, covering pages with calculations and sketches that showed the evolution of the Pegasus concept from first principles. This is volume 1 of 7. Each notebook is dated and time-stamped. Together, they document every stage of the Pegasus design, from initial concept through final specifications. He pulled out a stack of test reports, each one bearing his signature as the lead engineer. These are the test results from 147 prototype iterations, every one signed by me. None signed by Ms. Sterling or General Harding. The USB drive came next, slid across the table to the civilian engineer who had asked about blade geometry. This drive contains emails showing the development timeline. It also contains video that Ms. Sterling recorded ostensibly for company training materials. The engineer plugged the drive into his laptop. The room went silent as the video loaded, then filled with Marcus's voice explaining the blade asymmetry concept, the same concept Victoria had just presented as her own insight. The timestamp in the corner read 6 months before the patent filing. Victoria's face drained of color. The video showed Marcus at a whiteboard deriving the equations that governed airflow across the modified blades. His voice was patient, pedagogical, explaining each step to someone off camera. As I developed the Pegasus, the key insight was recognizing that vortex formation isn't a function of blade speed alone. It's a function of the interaction between blade geometry and boundary layer separation. If you modify the trailing edge angle to 47.3 degrees, you create a pressure gradient that keeps the boundary layer attached at higher RPM. Victoria's voice came from off-camera, tinged with admiration that sounded genuine, because it had been once. "This is brilliant, Marcus." "You're a genius." The timestamp was March 2023. The patent filing was September 2024. General Harding was nowhere in the video. The civilian engineer paused the playback and looked at Victoria. "Miss Sterling, can you explain equation 47 in the patent application? The one governing pressure distribution across the asymmetric blade?" Victoria's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "It's a fluid dynamics equation. The specifics are..." "Can you derive it?" "I have engineers for that level of detail, but you're listed as the inventor. You should understand your own invention." The room held its breath. The engineer turned to Marcus. "Mr. Brennan, same question." Marcus walked to the whiteboard mounted on the conference room wall. He picked up a marker and started writing, his movements fluid and unhesitating. The equation built itself line by line, each term explained in language that assumed competence but not expertise. The pressure distribution is a function of blade angle theta, rotational velocity omega, and fluid density rho. You start with the Navier-Stokes equation for incompressible flow, then introduce the boundary condition that velocity must equal 0 at the blade surface. He wrote for 5 minutes, deriving the equation from first principles, showing how the 47.3-degree angle emerged naturally from the mathematics when you optimized for minimal vortex formation. This is why the blade angle is 47.3, not 45. At 45 degrees, you get vortex formation at 18,000 RPM. At 47.3, vortex onset delays until 22,000, which is beyond our operational range. The engine never sees that condition in normal flight. The room was silent except for the scratch of marker on whiteboard. Colonel Vance leaned forward. "You just did that from memory?" "Yes, ma'am. I've derived it about 200 times over the last 4 years. It's my equation." Marcus set down the marker and turned to face Victoria. The moment stretched, heavy with the weight of everything that had been stolen and everything that was about to be reclaimed. "I stayed silent during the divorce because I wanted to see what you would do. You took the house, you took the car, you took the savings I'd been putting aside for Emily's college. I didn't fight you on any of it." His voice was calm, but something burned underneath, a fire that had been banked for 8 months and was now finding oxygen. "But you're not taking my work. You're not putting your name on something that could save lives. Because when that engine fails at 40,000 feet because you didn't understand the math, people die." He pointed to the colonels sitting in judgment. "They're people. My brothers and sisters in arms. The soldiers who depend on aircraft that work, on engines that don't quit when the mission goes bad." The room held its breath. "So no, Victoria. You can have the house. You can have the savings. You can have every dollar I ever earned. But you can't have my integrity." The silence that followed was broken by Colonel Vance standing. The other officers followed, a ripple of movement that culminated in a salute that Marcus hadn't received since his retirement ceremony 16 years earlier. He returned it, his hand crisped to his brow, and something in Emily's chest cracked open. Colonel Vance sat, her expression hard. This hearing is concluded. Patent application 11247-893 is flagged for USPTO fraud investigation. The Sterling Aerospace contract is suspended pending resolution of inventor attribution. General Harding, you're excused from this proceeding. The general stood, his face purple with rage, but he had enough sense to leave without speaking. Vance turned to Victoria. Miss Sterling, you have 30 days to respond to the fraud allegations. If you cannot provide evidence of substantial contribution to the invention, the patent will be invalidated and reissued with the correct inventor attribution. Dismissed. The Air Force panel filed out. The civilian engineers followed. Adrian gathered her documents with shaking hands. Victoria remained seated, staring at the whiteboard where Marcus's equations were still visible, evidence of a mind she had married and then tried to erase. Marcus packed his notebooks carefully, each one a piece of ammunition in a war he had never wanted to fight. Emily stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, and for the first time in 8 months, Marcus felt like he could breathe. They walked out of Wright-Patterson into a summer afternoon that smelled like cut grass and aviation fuel. The F-150 waited in the parking lot, rust and all, and Marcus unlocked the doors with hands that were finally steady. You were amazing, Dad. I just told the truth, honey. Emily pulled out the MIT letter, now creased from being folded and unfolded 100 times. Can we afford it now? The question hung between them, heavy with hope and fear. We'll figure it out. They drove to a diner on Route 4, a place called Maggie's that served breakfast all day and had vinyl booths that were older than Marcus. The waitress was in her 60s, gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she brought coffee without being asked. Emily ordered pancakes. Marcus ordered eggs he wouldn't eat. The waitress returned with their food, then hesitated. You're Marcus Brennan, aren't you? I saw you on the Defense News website. That thing you did at Wright-Patterson, standing up to Sterling Aerospace? Marcus felt heat creep up his neck. Yes, ma'am. That took guts. My late husband worked at Sterling for 30 years. Got laid off when they brought in all those MBA types. He would have loved to see someone tell Victoria Sterling she wasn't God's gift to aviation. She set down the check, then picked it up again. This one's on me. And I'm going to call some people at the VFW. We take care of our own, and your daughter deserves to go to MIT without you having to sell a kidney. Marcus's eyes stung. Thank you. That means more than you know. The waitress patted his shoulder and walked away, leaving Marcus and Emily alone with pancakes and the fragile beginning of hope. His phone rang 20 minutes later, a number he didn't recognize. Brennan. Mr. Brennan, this is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a patent attorney based in Columbus. I represent small inventors in disputes with corporate entities. Marcus's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Okay. I watched the video of your testimony at Wright-Patterson. It's already making rounds in the IP law community. What you did today was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and I'd like to help make sure it's the former. I appreciate that, but I can't afford. I'm offering pro bono representation. Free. Because what Sterling did to you happens every day, and most inventors don't have the documentation or the courage to fight back. You have both. Why would you work for free? Because I'm tired of watching companies steal from the people who actually create value. And because someone needs to remind Victoria Sterling that patents are supposed to protect inventors, not corporations. Marcus looked at Emily, who was watching him with eyes that held her mother's determination and his own stubborn hope. When can we start? Tomorrow. I'll file a counterclaim with the USPTO and a civil suit for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. We're going to make this right, Mr. Brennan. I promise you that. The call ended. Marcus set down his phone and discovered that Emily was crying, silent tears that tracked down her face and dripped onto her pancakes. What's wrong? Nothing. Everything's right. For the first time in months, everything's actually right. They finished their meal in the kind of silence that didn't need words. Outside, the Ohio sun was setting behind the strip malls and auto shops that lined Route 4, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reminded Marcus of Rebecca, of the way she used to say that every ending was just a different kind of beginning. He had lost a marriage. He had lost a home. He had lost years of savings and the naive belief that love was enough. But he had kept the one thing that mattered. The truth was still his. Victoria Sterling sat in her office long after the sun went down, staring at reports she couldn't focus on, drinking scotch that tasted like failure. Adrian had left after an hour of trying to strategize a response to the USPTO investigation. General Harding had sent a text announcing his resignation from the board, effective immediately, followed by a note from his lawyer threatening to sue Victoria for defamation if she implied he had known the patent attribution was fraudulent. The Air Force contract was suspended. The investors were demanding emergency meetings. The engineering team was circulating rumors that Marcus had been right all along. Victoria pulled up her contacts and found a name she had hoped never to use. Kyle Novak, private investigator, corporate intelligence specialist, the kind of man who found things people wanted to stay hidden. She typed a message. Need to discuss a sensitive matter, reputation management, willing to pay premium rates. The response came 30 seconds later. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., my office. Cash only. Victoria finished her scotch and poured another, watching the lights of Dayton spread out below her office window. Somewhere in that city, Marcus Brennan was probably asleep, dreaming engineer dreams about equations and engines that saved lives. She was going to destroy him. Not because she believed she could win the patent dispute, the evidence was overwhelming, but because losing to a quiet man who had trusted her, who had loved her, who had signed away everything without a fight, that was intolerable. If she was going down, Marcus Brennan was going down with her. The glass was empty, the city was dark, and Victoria Sterling, CEO of an aerospace company that was about to implode, began planning the kind of revenge that would make the patent fraud look like a misunderstanding. Kyle Novak's office occupied the second floor of a strip mall on Woodman Drive, sandwiched between a tax preparation service and a martial arts studio that smelled like sweat and regret. Victoria climbed the stairs at 9:50 in the morning, carrying a leather portfolio that contained $50,000 in hundreds, cash as requested, untraceable. The door was unmarked except for a number, 214. She knocked twice. The man who answered was 43, compact and muscular in the way of people who had learned violence professionally. His handshake was brief, efficient. The office behind him was sparse, a desk, 2 chairs, filing cabinets that looked military surplus. A single photograph on the wall showed a younger Kyle in Marine Corps dress blues, the kind of portrait they took before deployment. You're punctual. That's good. Victoria sat without being invited, setting the portfolio on the desk between them. I need someone discredited, professionally and personally. I need it done quietly, and I need it done in a way that can't trace back to me. Kyle didn't reach for the portfolio. His eyes stayed on Victoria's face, reading tells that most people didn't know they had. Who's the target? Marcus Brennan, my ex-husband, former lead engineer at my company. The Air Force hearing. I saw the coverage. You filed a fraudulent patent. Victoria's jaw tightened. I'm not here to discuss the merits of a legal dispute. I'm here to hire you to find leverage. What kind of leverage? anything that destroys his credibility. Criminal history, financial irregularities, affairs. I don't care what it is, as long as it makes the USPTO and the Air Force question his testimony. Kyle leaned back in his chair, the metal frame creaking under his weight. I charge $500 per day, plus expenses. You want surveillance, background checks, financial forensics? Figure 2 weeks minimum. That's $7,000, plus whatever expenses run. Victoria opened the portfolio, revealing the stacked bills. This is $50,000. I want you on this full time. I want daily reports, and I want results within 10 days. The money sat between them, a test and a transaction. What if there's nothing to find? Guy works at an aerospace company for 28 years, raises a daughter alone, keeps his nose clean. Some people are exactly what they appear to be. Then you're creative. Everyone has secrets. Find his. Kyle studied the money for a long moment, then closed the portfolio without touching it. I'll take the case, but I don't manufacture evidence. I find what's there. If Brennan's clean, I'll tell you he's clean. That understood? Just find me something I can use. She left the portfolio on the desk and walked out, her heels sharp against the linoleum. Kyle waited until her car pulled out of the parking lot before opening the portfolio again. $50,000. Payment for destroying a man who had already lost everything except his integrity. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. Sarah Mitchell's law office was everything Kyle's wasn't. Bright, professional, located in a renovated historic building in downtown Columbus. Marcus sat in a conference room that overlooked High Street, watching traffic move through the short north while Sarah spread documents across the table between them. She was 28, a graduate of Ohio State's law school who had built her practice on contingency cases against corporations that stole from inventors. Her overhead was high, her billable hours were low, and her win rate was 83%. The USPTO investigation is moving faster than I expected. They've requested all of Sterling's development files for the Pegasus engine. Victoria has 14 days to comply. Marcus looked up from the document he was reviewing, a timeline of the patent filing that Sarah had constructed from public records. Will she give them the files? She has to. It's a federal investigation. If she refuses, they'll subpoena. If she complies, they'll see that every piece of technical documentation has your name on it, not hers. And then what? Then the patent gets invalidated and reissued with you as the sole inventor. Sterling loses the Air Force contract. The fraud investigation continues, possibly resulting in civil penalties. Possibly criminal? Sarah's expression was carefully neutral. Patent fraud is usually handled civilly, unless there's evidence of conspiracy or intent to defraud the government. Since this involved a defense contract, the DOJ might get involved. But that's not your concern. Your concern is getting proper attribution and making sure Victoria can't profit from your work. Emily's college costs are my concern. MIT wants a $60,000 deposit by October 1st. That's 6 weeks away. Sarah pulled out another folder, this one containing bank statements and financial aid documents that Marcus had provided. The VFW fundraiser is up to $12,000. I spoke with MIT's financial aid office. Given your change in circumstances, they're reviewing your package. But honestly, Marcus, even with adjustments, you're looking at significant loans. How significant? $150,000 over 4 years, maybe more. The number sat heavy in the room. Marcus had spent 28 years avoiding debt, living within his means, building a life that didn't depend on credit cards and payment plans. The idea of 6-figure student loans felt like falling backwards into a hole he'd never climb out of. She got in. She worked for it. I'll figure out how to pay for it. There might be another option. If we win the civil suit against Sterling for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, You could be awarded damages, lost wages, emotional distress, punitive damages. We're talking potentially 7 figures. How long would that take? 18 months. Maybe 2 years. Emily starts in 8 weeks. Sarah closed the folder. Then we focus on the patent first. Get your name on it, get the recognition, leverage that into consulting work or expert witness opportunities. Engineers with your credentials can make $500 per hour as expert witnesses in patent litigation. I'm not an expert witness. I'm an engineer. You're both. And right now, you're an engineer who needs money for his daughter's education. Let me help you get it. The Fairborn VFW Post 526 had been around since 1948, a single-story brick building with a parking lot full of pickup trucks and sedans that averaged 15 years old. The interior smelled like beer and coffee, the walls covered with photographs of men and women in uniform, plaques commemorating deployments and lost comrades. Marcus stood at the front of the main hall on a Thursday evening, uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with the crowd. 73 people had shown up, vets from Korea to Afghanistan, their families, local business owners who remembered when Dayton was an aviation city instead of a cautionary tale about manufacturing decline. Commander Bill Peterson, a Vietnam vet who walked with a limp from shrapnel that doctors had stopped trying to remove in 1972, handed Marcus a microphone that squealed feedback until someone adjusted the PA system. Most of you know Marcus. Air Force, 16 years. Came home, put his skills to work keeping our pilots safe. He's got a daughter heading to MIT, and he's in a fight with people who think stealing is okay as long as you've got a corporate lawyer. Applause rippled through the hall. Marcus felt his throat tighten. I appreciate you all being here, but I don't need charity. I just need... You need $60,000 in 6 weeks, Peterson interrupted. We've raised $12,000 so far. Every dollar helps. A woman in her 70s stood up, her voice carrying despite the tremor. My husband was a B-52 navigator. Your engines brought him home from missions where other planes didn't make it. This isn't charity. This is us taking care of family. The donations came in increments. $20 from a machinist who had been laid off, $500 from a retired colonel, $100 from a waitress who had served Marcus coffee every morning for 3 years. The total climbed to $18,000, then $22,000, then $27,000. Emily stood in the back of the hall, watching strangers give money they probably couldn't afford because they believed in her father. She had been 7 when her mother died, old enough to understand that cancer was stealing something irreplaceable, but young enough to believe that her father could fix anything. He couldn't fix cancer, but he had fixed everything else, building a life out of grief and determination that had somehow gotten her to MIT. Now she watched him thank people who had less than he did, and understood that integrity wasn't just a word. It was the currency that mattered when everything else was stripped away. Defense industry news traveled through professional networks with the speed of classified gossip. The suspension of Sterling Aerospace's Air Force contract made the front page of Aviation Week, accompanied by a photograph of Victoria that was 3 years old and heavily airbrushed. The article was factual, careful not to make allegations that could trigger a libel suit, but the implication was clear. Sterling had claimed credit for work they didn't do, and now they were paying the price. The hit piece appeared 2 days later on a blog called Mill Arrow Truth, a site that positioned itself as investigative journalism but was actually a platform for anonymous attacks funded by corporate interests. The headline was surgical. Disgruntled engineer or fraud? The Marcus Brennan question. The article questioned everything: his service record, his technical credentials, his motives for challenging the patent. It quoted unnamed sources who suggested that Marcus had been terminated from Sterling for performance issues, that his notebooks were fabricated after the fact, that his testimony at Wright-Patterson was coached by competitors trying to sabotage Sterling's Air Force relationship. The unnamed sources were fiction. The performance issues were invention. But the damage was immediate. Sarah called Marcus at 6 in the morning, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Have you seen Mill Arrow Truth?" "I don't read blogs." "You need to read this one. They're claiming you falsified documentation." "That's insane. The timestamps are verifiable. The test data has signatures from multiple witnesses. The video has metadata showing." "I know, but perception matters. The USPTO investigator is going to see this. The Air Force Procurement Office is going to see this. We need to respond." "How?" "Carefully. I'm drafting a statement." "But Marcus, this is just the beginning. Victoria is going to come at you from every angle. She's going to try to make you look like a liar, a fraud, someone with an axe to grind." "I am someone with an axe to grind. She stole my work." "Then we need to make sure the truth is louder than her money." Kyle Novak spent 11 days following Marcus Brennan, documenting a life that was remarkable only in its ordinariness. Marcus woke at 05:30 every morning, ran 3 miles through the neighborhoods around his apartment, showered, made breakfast for Emily. He drove her to school in the F-150, the truck burning oil badly enough that Kyle could follow from a quarter-mile back just by watching the exhaust. After dropping Emily, Marcus went to the library. Not to work. He didn't have a job anymore. He went to use the internet, to research patent law and USPTO procedures, to email with Sarah Mitchell about legal strategy. He ate lunch from a cooler he packed himself. He picked Emily up from volleyball practice. He made dinner, helped with homework, went to bed by 2200. On weekends, he volunteered at the VFW, helping with building maintenance and veteran outreach. He attended Emily's games, sitting in bleachers with other parents who were more interested in their phones than their daughters' serves. He grocery shopped with coupons clipped from the Sunday paper. Kyle ran his background through every database available to private investigators. No criminal record, no civil suits, no bankruptcies, no affairs, no gambling debts, no hidden vices. The man's biggest extravagance was taking Emily to a Mexican restaurant on Friday nights, where they shared a plate of enchiladas and he drank 1 beer. The financial forensics were equally clean. Marcus had $17,000 in savings, down from $43,000 before the divorce. His checking account showed automatic payments to utilities, insurance, and a storage unit in Fairborn, where he kept the engineering files that Victoria hadn't known to seize. No offshore accounts, no suspicious transfers, no evidence of being funded by Sterling's competitors. Kyle compiled his report on day 12, sitting in Victoria's office while she read through 12 pages of surveillance logs and financial analysis that all pointed to the same conclusion. He's exactly what he appears to be: a widower who raises his daughter alone and designs aircraft engines. No secrets, no scandals, nothing you can use. Victoria set down the report, her face unreadable. Everyone has something. Not everyone. Some people are just decent. It's rare, but it happens. Then dig deeper. Talk to people who knew him in the Air Force. Find old girlfriends. Check his daughter's social media. There has to be something. Kyle had been paid $50,000. He could walk away, keep the money, let Victoria find someone else to chase ghosts. But something in her desperation triggered the instinct that had kept him alive through 2 tours in Fallujah. The sense that someone was about to do something catastrophically stupid. "Ms. Sterling, professional advice? Drop this. You filed a fraudulent patent. He caught you. The USPTO is going to invalidate it. Take the loss, restructure the company, move on. Going after him personally won't change the outcome. You're dismissed." Kyle stood, leaving his report on her desk. "One more thing. If you're thinking about doing something illegal to fix this, don't. Brennan has documentation. He has witnesses, and he has people watching out for him. Whatever you're planning, it won't work." Victoria's smile was ice. I said you're dismissed. Marcus's security clearance had been inactive since his retirement from the Air Force, but it was still on file. A secret clearance that he had maintained for 16 years while working on classified propulsion projects. Inactive clearances could be reactivated if needed, and Marcus had assumed his would remain clean indefinitely. The letter from the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency arrived on a Tuesday. Formal language on government letterhead that made his hands shake. Security Clearance Review. Marcus J. Brennan. Dear Mr. Brennan, this office has received information suggesting concerns regarding your eligibility for access to classified information. Specifically, allegations have been made regarding falsification of technical documentation and potential compromise of proprietary defense contractor information. Pursuant to Executive Order 12,968, a review of your clearance status has been initiated. You have the right to respond to these allegations in writing within 30 days. The letter continued for 2 pages, bureaucratic language that translated to, someone had filed a complaint claiming Marcus was a security risk. Sarah was on the phone within an hour of receiving the scanned copy. This is Victoria. She's trying to destroy your professional reputation completely. If you lose your clearance, you can't work in defense. You can't consult. You can't serve as an expert witness on military contracts. Can she do that? Just make accusations and trigger a review? Anyone can file a complaint. The DCSA has to investigate. The good news is that investigations are thorough. They'll interview people who know you, review your actual record. The bad news is it takes months, and during that time, you're radioactive to potential employers. I don't have months. I have Emily's tuition due in 4 weeks. The financial pressure was becoming physical. The F-150's transmission was slipping, a repair that would cost $3,000 that Marcus didn't have. The apartment complex had notified him of a rent increase effective October 1st, an extra $200 per month that would gut his remaining savings. Emily needed new volleyball shoes, a laptop for college, a winter coat because her old one was 2 sizes too small. Marcus sat in his apartment on a Wednesday night, surrounded by bills he couldn't pay and a future that looked like a series of calculations with no solution. Emily was at practice. The silence was the kind that amplified every fear he had spent 28 years trying to outwork. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Brennan. Mr. Brennan, this is Principal Andrews at Fairborn High. There's been an incident involving Emily. Marcus's blood turned to ice. What kind of incident? She's fine physically, but there was some harassment, graffiti in her locker, messages on social media. We've involved the school resource officer. Marcus was already grabbing his keys. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The graffiti was simple, vicious. Patent fraud daughter. The social media messages were worse. Anonymous accounts accusing Emily of benefiting from her father's lies, suggesting she didn't deserve MIT, claiming the VFW fundraiser was a scam. Emily sat in the principal's office, her face blank in the way of teenagers who were trying not to cry in front of adults. Marcus knelt beside her chair, his hand on her shoulder. You okay? The blankness cracked. Why are they doing this? I didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. People who do wrong things like to pretend everyone else is dirty too. It makes them feel better about being terrible. Principal Andrews cleared her throat. We're investigating, but the accounts are anonymous. Without cooperation from the social media platforms, it's difficult to identify who's behind it. But Marcus knew. Victoria had found the one thing that would make him stop fighting. Not his reputation, not his career, his daughter. The storage unit in Fairborn sat behind a BP gas station on Dayton Yellow Springs Road, a facility that rented 10 by 10 spaces to people accumulating the overflow of American life. Marcus's unit contained boxes of engineering files, old furniture from the house he'd lost, Rebecca's belongings that he hadn't been able to donate yet. He went there after leaving the high school, after taking Emily home and watching her retreat to a room with eyes that looked like her mother's when the cancer had progressed to the point where hope became cruelty. The boxes were organized with engineer's precision, each one labeled with dates and project names. He found the one marked Pegasus, primary documentation, and pulled out his phone. The call connected on the second ring. Sterling Aerospace, how may I direct your call? Victoria Sterling's office, one moment please. The hold music was classical, something by Mozart that sounded like civilization pretending it still existed. Then Victoria's assistant, a woman named Jennifer, who had always been kind to Marcus before the divorce. Miss Sterling's office? This is Marcus Brennan. I need to speak with her. Mr. Brennan, I'm not sure that... Tell her if she doesn't take this call, my next call is to the FBI about witness intimidation. Silence. Then hold music again. Then Victoria's voice, cold and controlled. You have 30 seconds. Leave Emily alone. This is between you and me. I don't know what you're talking about. The harassment, the social media attacks, the graffiti. If you want to come after me, fine. But my daughter is 17 years old, and she's done nothing except exist. You think very highly of yourself, Marcus. Not everything is about you. The accounts were created the same day Kyle Novak finished his investigation. The timing is interesting. Victoria's pause was a tell. If you're accusing me of something, do it through your lawyer. I'm not accusing. I'm warning. Emily is off limits. Whatever you need to do to feel like you won, do it to me. But if you touch my daughter again, I will make it my life's work to ensure you never recover from this. Is that a threat? It's a promise. From one engineer to another, I can be very precise when I need to be. He hung up before she could respond. Victoria sat in her office, staring at the phone like it had transformed into something dangerous. The harassment campaign had been Adrian's idea, a way to pressure Marcus into withdrawing his USPTO complaint by making his daughter's life unbearable. It had seemed efficient, ruthless in the way that corporate warfare rewarded, but Marcus's voice had carried something that money couldn't manufacture and lawyers couldn't defend against. The absolute certainty of a man who had lost everything except the capacity to protect what mattered. Adrian appeared in the doorway, reading Victoria's expression. He called? He warned me. And? Victoria pulled up the Mill Arrow Truth blog on her computer, scanning through the comments section where readers were debating whether Marcus was a hero or a fraud. The narrative was fracturing. Some people believed Sterling. Others believed the engineer. The truth was becoming a matter of perspective. We need to force a conclusion. The USPTO investigation could take months. The civil suit could take years. Sterling doesn't have that kind of time. What are you proposing? Victoria turned her monitor so Adrian could see the screen. It showed a blueprint of Sterling Aerospace's testing facility, specifically Hangar 7, where the Pegasus prototype was undergoing final validation. An accident. Something that damages the prototype and can be traced back to sabotage. Marcus still has friends at Sterling, engineers who give him information. We create evidence that he tried to destroy the engine to prevent us from completing the Air Force demonstration. That's conspiracy to commit fraud. If you're caught, I won't be caught. We make it look like he broke in, accessed systems he shouldn't have access to, caused damage that sets the program back months. The Air Force cancels the contract permanently. Marcus gets charged with industrial sabotage. His clearance is revoked. His daughter's fundraiser dries up when people realize he's a criminal. Adrian's expression was the careful blank of lawyers who were hearing things they couldn't ethically ignore. I can't be part of this conversation. Then leave. Adrian stood, gathering her tablet and briefcase. Victoria, whatever you're planning, think it through. Marcus Brennan has spent 8 months being careful. He has documentation. He has witnesses. He has Sarah Mitchell, who is very good at her job. If you do this and it goes wrong, you won't just lose the company. You'll go to prison. Then I'll make sure it doesn't go wrong. Adrian left without another word, her heels echoing in the hallway like a countdown. Victoria pulled up her contacts, finding a name she had used once before for a different kind of problem. Derek Chen, a systems administrator at Sterling, who had gambling debts and a mortgage he couldn't afford. The kind of man who would do unethical things for ethical reasons, like keeping his family housed. She typed a message. Need to discuss a security enhancement project. Off-books consulting, paid in cash. Interested? The response came within minutes. How much? Enough to cover what you owe in Vegas. I'm listening. Victoria smiled for the first time in weeks, the expression empty of anything resembling joy. If Marcus wanted to fight dirty, she would show him what dirty actually looked like. The Sterling Aerospace night shift ended at midnight, the facility going dark except for security lights and the maintenance crew that rotated through on 4-hour intervals. Derek Chen waited until 0200 to enter Hangar 7, using his administrator credentials to bypass the biometric locks. The Pegasus prototype sat on the test stand, a sculpture of titanium and composite materials that represented 4 years of Marcus Brennan's genius. Dirk carried a laptop and a USB drive containing malware designed to corrupt the engine control unit's firmware, making it appear that someone had remotely accessed the system and introduced code that would cause catastrophic failure during high RPM testing. The malware would be traced to an IP address that belonged to the library where Marcus spent his mornings. Derek plugged in the USB drive, watching the progress bar crawl across his screen. 30 seconds. 60. 90. The hangar lights blazed to life. Derek spun, his heart hammering. 3 figures stood in the doorway. A security guard, a man in a suit who looked like federal law enforcement, and Marcus Brennan, holding a tablet that was recording everything. The security guard spoke first, his voice flat. Mr. Chen, step away from the engine. Derek's hands shook as he pulled out the USB drive and held it up like a white flag. I can explain. The man in the suit stepped forward, badge visible on his belt. Special Agent Morrison, FBI. Derek Chen, you're under federal investigation for conspiracy to commit sabotage of defense contractor property. Do not move. Do not touch anything else. Place your hands on your head. Marcus hadn't moved from the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes never left Derek's face. Who paid you? Derek's resistance lasted approximately 5 seconds. Victoria Sterling. $50,000. She said it was for security testing. Agent Morrison pulled out handcuffs. We're going to have a long conversation about that. Marcus, you good here? Marcus nodded, still recording. Good. This is evidence now. Don't touch anything. They led Derek out, his protests echoing in the empty hangar. Marcus stood alone with the engine he had designed, the engine Victoria had tried to destroy to frame him for crimes he would never commit. Sarah Mitchell had been right. Victoria was desperate. Desperate people made mistakes, and Marcus Brennan, quiet engineer and careful documenter, had been ready. The FBI field office in Dayton occupied a nondescript building on Wolf Creek Pike, designed to blend into the suburban landscape of strip malls and office parks. Marcus sat in an interview room at 0700 the morning after Derek Chen's arrest, drinking coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the previous administration. Special Agent Morrison sat across from him, a digital recorder between them capturing every word. Walk me through how you knew. Marcus pulled out his own tablet, the one that had been recording in Hangar 7, and scrolled back through weeks of documentation. Victoria's pattern was escalating. First, the blog posts attacking my credibility, then the harassment targeting Emily. When that didn't make me withdraw the USPTO complaint, I knew she'd try something more aggressive. You anticipated sabotage? I anticipated desperation. I contacted Sterling's head of security, a man named Bill Kowalski. We served together in the Air Force. I told him Victoria might try to access the Pegasus prototype, asked him to flag any unusual activity in Hangar 7 after hours. And he contacted you when Chen entered the facility. He contacted the FBI and me simultaneously. You got there first. I just documented. Morrison made a note on his legal pad, the kind of physical record-keeping that suggested he didn't trust digital files for things that might end up in federal court. Chen is cooperating. He's provided text messages, bank records showing a $50,000 wire transfer from Victoria Sterling's personal account, and a recorded phone call where she explicitly instructed him to corrupt the engine control firmware. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, a knot that had been tightening since the day Victoria handed him divorce papers. So it's over. The criminal investigation into her? We have enough for conspiracy to commit sabotage, wire fraud, and obstruction of a federal investigation. The U.S. Attorney is drafting charges now. Agent Morrison leaned back, studying Marcus with the kind of assessment that came from years of interviewing witnesses and suspects. You could have stopped her earlier. The blog posts, the social media harassment. You had evidence. Why wait? Because I needed her to cross a line that even good lawyers couldn't defend. Blog posts are opinion. Social media is anonymous. But paying someone to sabotage a defense contractor's prototype? That's federal prison. You wanted justice, not revenge. I wanted her to face consequences that matched what she did. Stealing credit for an engine is bad. Trying to destroy it to frame someone? That's worse. I needed her to show who she really was. Morrison nodded slowly, the gesture of someone who understood the difference between legal strategy and moral necessity. The arrest warrant will be executed this afternoon. You'll need to stay available for testimony, but you're free to go. Marcus stood, then hesitated. The $50,000 she paid Chen. What happens to that money? Asset forfeiture. It'll be seized as proceeds of criminal activity. Can it be redirected? There's a VFW fundraiser for my daughter's college tuition. That $50,000 would close the gap. Morrison's expression suggested he'd heard stranger requests. That's not how asset forfeiture works. But I'll make a note in the file. Sometimes judges get creative with restitution. Victoria Sterling's arrest happened at Sterling Aerospace headquarters, executed with a kind of federal precision that left no room for negotiation. 6 agents, 4 vehicles, and a warrant that had been signed by a magistrate judge who took a dim view of people who sabotaged military contracts. The receptionist who had known Marcus for a decade watched as agents walked past her desk toward the executive suite. She didn't try to stop them. Later, she would tell local reporters that she had been waiting for this moment since the day Marcus signed those divorce papers. Victoria was in a board meeting, presenting quarterly financials to investors, who were already nervous about the suspended Air Force contract. The conference room door opened mid-sentence, her words about projected revenue dying as Special Agent Morrison stepped inside. Victoria Sterling? She recognized him from Hangar 7, from the security footage she had reviewed obsessively, trying to understand how Marcus had known to be there. This is a private meeting. You have no authority. Morrison held up the warrant, speaking over her objection. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit sabotage of defense contractor property, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. The board members sat frozen, watching their CEO's face cycle through disbelief, rage, and finally the blank calculation of someone trying to find an exit that didn't exist. General Harding, attending via video conference, disconnected without a word. Adrian Blackwell, sitting at the far end of the table, closed her laptop and stood. "Don't say anything, Victoria. I'll meet you at the federal courthouse." But Victoria was already talking, the words spilling out in the desperate cadence of people who believed they could explain their way out of handcuffs. "This is Marcus Brennan's doing. He's fabricating evidence, manipulating federal agents. I'm the victim here." "Ma'am, we have recorded phone calls, financial records, and a cooperative witness who is currently describing in detail how you paid him to sabotage the Pegasus engine." "That's a lie. Derek Chen is a disgruntled employee. He's—" "Victoria Sterling, turn around and place your hands behind your back." The handcuffs clicked shut in a conference room that smelled like expensive coffee and collapsed empires. The investors watched in silence as agents led her past the receptionist, past the framed photographs of aircraft she had claimed to engineer, past the legacy her father had built and she had burned to ash. The perp walk made the evening news. Victoria in handcuffs, her Armani suit rumpled, her expression oscillating between fury and disbelief. The footage played on loop across cable news networks that loved stories about corporate executives facing consequences, defense contractors committing fraud, former spouses going to war, a daughter trying to get to MIT while her father fought for his integrity. Emily watched the broadcast from Marcus's apartment, her phone buzzing with texts from classmates who had been harassing her 2 days earlier and were now sending apologies. The shift in social dynamics was whiplash-inducing, the way teenagers recalibrated their cruelty when the power structure changed. "Dad, you're on CNN." Marcus looked up from the paperwork Sarah Mitchell had sent over, documents related to the USPTO patent review that was now moving forward without Sterling's interference. "What are they saying?" "That you're a hero? That you stood up to corruption? That Victoria Sterling is going to prison." "Do you believe that?" Emily muted the television, turning to face her father with eyes that looked too old for 17. "I believe you did what was right. That's harder than being a hero." The words settled between them, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened since Rebecca died. Marcus had tried to be both parents, to fill spaces that couldn't be filled, to make up for losses that couldn't be compensated. He had succeeded in some ways and failed in others, but he had never stopped trying. MIT sent a new financial aid package today. Full scholarship plus a $20,000 annual stipend for living expenses. Emily's breath caught. Because of the news coverage? Because their admissions committee read about what happened and decided you deserve a chance that isn't buried in debt. They called it the Rebecca Brennan Memorial Scholarship, named after your mother. The tears came then, the kind that Marcus had learned to recognize as grief mixed with gratitude, the complicated emotional mathematics of teenagers who were navigating loss and hope simultaneously. Mom would have loved MIT. She would have loved you getting there. The federal courthouse in downtown Dayton was a brutalist concrete structure from the 1970s, designed in an era when government buildings were meant to intimidate rather than welcome. Victoria's arraignment happened on a Friday afternoon, the courtroom packed with reporters, Sterling employees, and curiosity seekers who wanted to watch a CEO answer to charges that carried a maximum sentence of 20 years. The magistrate judge was a woman in her 60s who had been appointed during the Obama administration and had a reputation for being unmoved by wealth or status. She read the charges with the kind of precision that suggested she had already formed opinions about people who sabotaged military equipment. "Ms. Sterling, you're charged with 1 count of conspiracy to commit sabotage, 2 counts of wire fraud, and 1 count of obstruction of justice. How do you plead?" Adrian stood beside Victoria, whispering something that made her client's jaw tighten. Then Victoria's voice, stripped of the executive polish that usually armored it. "Not guilty." The prosecution requested no bail, arguing that Victoria had the resources to flee and the motivation to interfere with witnesses. Adrian argued that her client was a respected business owner with deep community ties and no criminal history. The judge's decision was swift. Bail is set at $500,000, cash or bond. Defendant will surrender passport and submit to electronic monitoring. Trial date to be set within 60 days per Speedy Trial Act. Next, Victoria was led out through a side door, avoiding the cameras that had captured her arrival. The bail bondsman's office was 2 blocks away, a dingy storefront that smelled like cigarette smoke and desperation. By 1800 hours, she was released with an ankle monitor that would track her every movement, a technological leash that represented how far she had fallen. The Sterling Aerospace Board of Directors convened an emergency meeting 72 hours after Victoria's arrest. The motion to remove her as CEO passed unanimously, with General Harding abstaining via the video conference link he refused to terminate despite having no formal role in the company anymore. The interim CEO was promoted from VP of Operations, a man named Richard Chen, who had spent 30 years building aircraft and had no patience for executives who thought engineering was just expensive math. His first action was calling Marcus Brennan. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Marcus was at the Fairborn Public Library, researching expert witness opportunities in patent litigation cases. Sarah Mitchell had been right. Engineers with his credentials could make serious money testifying about intellectual property disputes. Mr. Brennan, this is Richard Chen. We haven't met, but I've been following your situation closely. Marcus saved his research and closed the laptop, stepping outside to the parking lot where the conversation wouldn't disturb other library patrons. What can I do for you, Mr. Chen? I'd like to offer you a consulting contract. Sterling needs to rebuild credibility with the Air Force, and the best way to do that is by having the actual engineer behind Pegasus lead the final testing and certification. I'm not interested in working for Sterling. I understand, but I'm not offering employment. I'm offering a 6-month consulting contract at $500 per hour, 40 hours per week. That's roughly $500,000, enough to cover your daughter's education and provide a buffer while you figure out your next move. The number sat between them, impossible and necessary. Why would you pay me that? Because it's what you're worth. Because Sterling owes you, and because the Air Force won't trust the Pegasus engine unless your name is attached to the final certification. This isn't charity. It's enlightened self-interest. Marcus watched a mother loading groceries into a minivan, her toddler struggling with a car seat buckle. Ordinary life, the kind that continued regardless of patent disputes and federal arrests. I'll need it in writing, and I want final approval authority on all technical decisions related to Pegasus. Done. I'll have the contract to your attorney by end of business today. The call ended. Marcus stood in the parking lot, feeling the September sun on his face, and allowed himself to believe that maybe the fight was actually over. The USPTO patent review concluded 3 weeks after Victoria's arrest, the investigation accelerated by the criminal proceedings that had made Sterling Aerospace's fraud a matter of public record. The examiner's report was 37 pages of technical analysis, legal citations, and a conclusion that was unambiguous. Based on review of submitted documentation, testimony, and examination of physical evidence, this office finds that patent application 11247-893 was filed with false inventor attribution. The application is hereby invalidated. A corrected application listing Marcus J. Brennan as sole inventor will be processed with expedited review. The corrected patent was issued on October 15th, 4 days before Emily left for MIT. The official document arrived via certified mail, government letterhead, and embossed seals that made it look like something from a different century. Marcus opened it at the kitchen table while Emily packed boxes in her bedroom, her entire life condensed into luggage that would fit in the F-150's truck bed. Patent number 11247-893-A. Title: Advanced Turbofan Engine with Optimized Blade Geometry and Composite Housing. Inventor: Marcus J. Brennan. His name, his work, finally recognized by the system he had trusted to protect people who created value instead of those who stole it. Emily emerged from her bedroom carrying a framed photograph of Rebecca, the one that had sat on her nightstand since she was 7. "We should get going soon. Boston's a 12-hour drive." Marcus folded the patent carefully, sliding it into a folder that contained other important documents: Emily's birth certificate, Rebecca's death certificate, the divorce papers that had started this entire nightmare. "Give me 5 minutes. There's something I need to do first." He drove to the storage unit in Fairborn, the place where he had kept the documentation that proved Victoria had lied. The boxes were still there. 7 volumes of notebooks and test results that he would never need again. He loaded them into the truck bed, then drove to Sterling Aerospace. The security guard at the gate recognized him, waving him through without checking credentials. Marcus parked outside the main office and carried the boxes inside, stacking them on the receptionist's desk. These belonged to Sterling. Engineering files from the Pegasus development. Mr. Chen might want them for the Air Force certification. The receptionist, the same woman who had watched Victoria's arrest, smiled with genuine warmth. "I heard about the patent. Congratulations. You deserved that. I just wanted my name on my work. That's more than most people get." Marcus left the boxes and walked out, feeling lighter than he had in months. The past could stay at Sterling. He was driving his daughter to her future. The road to Boston was long enough for conversation and silence in equal measure. They stopped at a rest area in Pennsylvania for bad coffee and sandwiches wrapped in plastic. They drove through New York in darkness, the city lights a blur of ambition and noise that neither of them wanted. They reached Cambridge as the sun rose over the Charles River, turning the water into hammered gold. Mattee's campus was everything Emily had imagined, and nothing she was prepared for. Buildings that looked like the future had already arrived. Students who moved with the confidence of people who knew they belonged. Parents unloading Range Rovers and Tesla SUVs, carrying boxes that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. He parked the F-150 in a visitor lot, the truck's exhaust adding to the September morning haze. Emily's dorm was a converted brownstone, her room a single with a window that overlooked Massachusetts Avenue. They made 4 trips to carry her belongings upstairs. Marcus's back protesting the stairs in ways that reminded him he was 52 and his body remembered every year. The room was small, but hers. Emily unpacked with the efficiency of teenagers who wanted their parents to leave so they could start their actual lives. Marcus helped hang Rebecca's photograph on the wall, adjusting it until it was level. "You're going to do great here." Emily turned, her expression serious. "I know what you gave up for this. The house, the savings. 5 years of your life married to someone who didn't deserve you. I didn't give it up. I chose what mattered more." "That's the same thing." "No. Giving up is surrender. Choosing is strategy." The distinction settled between them, a final lesson from a father who had taught her that integrity wasn't optional and silence wasn't weakness. Marcus drove back to Ohio alone, the truck lighter without Emily's boxes, his chest heavier with the absence that every parent feels when their child steps into a future that doesn't include them. He stopped at the same rest area in Pennsylvania, drinking the same bad coffee, and called Sarah Mitchell. "The civil suit. I want to drop it." Sarah's pause was the kind lawyers made when clients said things that didn't align with their financial interests. "Marcus, we have a strong case." "Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. You could be awarded 7 figures in damages. I have the patent. I have the consulting contract. I have Emily at MIT. That's enough. Sterling owes you for what they put you through. Victoria's going to prison. The company is under new management. Continuing the suit just drags it out, keeps me tied to something I want to be free from. Sarah's sigh carried through the phone, the sound of lawyers recognizing when their clients had made decisions that logic couldn't reverse. I'll file a motion to dismiss. But Marcus, you're allowed to want compensation for what you lost. I lost a marriage to someone who didn't love me. I lost money I can replace. I lost time I would have wasted anyway. What I gained was worth more. What did you gain? The knowledge that when it mattered, I chose correctly. The trial of Victoria Sterling began on a Monday in January, winter pressing against the courthouse windows with a kind of Ohio cold that made people question why they lived anywhere that required wind chill calculations. Marcus sat in the gallery, subpoenaed as a witness for the prosecution, watching jury selection with the detached interest of someone whose outcome was already determined. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Derek Chen testified for 3 hours, walking through phone calls and text messages that showed Victoria explicitly ordering sabotage. Financial records traced the $50,000 payment. Security footage showed Chen entering Hangar 7 with equipment he had no legitimate reason to possess. The defense strategy was desperation dressed as reasonable doubt. Adrian argued that Victoria had been conducting a security audit, that Chen had misunderstood his instructions, that the whole thing was a tragic misunderstanding, complicated by a bitter divorce. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Victoria showed no reaction, her face blank, in the way people look when everything they built has collapsed, and there's nothing left to protect. The judge scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later, allowing time for pre-sentence reports and victim impact statements. Marcus was asked if he wanted to provide a statement. He declined. What's left to say? Sarah sat beside him in the gallery, watching Victoria being led out by federal marshals. You could talk about what she cost you, the emotional damage, the professional harm. That's what she wants, to stay at the center of my story. So what's your story? That I'm a father who got his daughter to MIT, an engineer who designed an engine that will save lives, a man who learned that staying silent doesn't mean accepting defeat. The words carried the weight of everything that had happened since the divorce papers were signed. A journey from humiliation to vindication that had required patience Marcus hadn't known he possessed. Victoria's sentencing happened on a Thursday in March, the kind of gray morning that suggested spring was theoretical rather than imminent. The courtroom was less crowded than during the trial, the media having moved on to newer scandals. Marcus attended because Sarah suggested it might provide closure, though he suspected closure was something people invented to justify showing up to watch their enemies fall. The judge had read the pre-sentence report, a document that outlined Victoria's education, her professional accomplishments, her complete lack of criminal history prior to the decision to sabotage the Pegasus engine. Character witnesses had testified about her philanthropy, her business acumen, her role in transforming Sterling Aerospace into a competitive defense contractor. None of it mattered. Miss Sterling, the court has considered all submitted materials and testimony. What you did wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated attempt to destroy a man's reputation, sabotage critical military equipment, and obstruct federal investigators. Victoria stood beside Adrian, her posture rigid with the kind of control that suggested she knew what was coming and had accepted it. You're hereby sentenced to 48 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You will pay restitution in the amount of $117,000 to cover investigative costs and damages to Sterling Aerospace. You will forfeit all assets obtained through fraudulent activity, including the patent filing fees and associated legal costs. The gavel came down. Victoria was led away. Adrian gathered her files with the mechanical efficiency of lawyers who had lost and were already planning appeals they knew would fail. Marcus walked out of the courthouse into March cold that felt like possibility. Sarah joined him on the steps, both of them watching traffic move through downtown Dayton like the world hadn't just changed for someone inside. "How do you feel?" "Tired." "That's honest." "I didn't want this. Any of it. I just wanted credit for my work." Sarah pulled her coat tighter against the wind. "You got that. The patent has your name." The Pegasus engine is going into production with you listed as the designer. The Air Force is happy. Sterling is rebuilding. Emily's at MIT. So why doesn't it feel like winning? Because you're not the kind of person who enjoys watching someone lose, even when they deserve it. Marcus thought about Victoria in handcuffs, about the empire she had inherited and destroyed through arrogance and theft. He thought about General Harding, who had resigned from every board position and disappeared into consulting work that kept him far from the defense industry. He thought about Adrian, still practicing law, but with a reputation that would never fully recover from representing a client who had committed such obvious fraud. And he thought about himself, standing on courthouse steps in a city that had been his home for 3 decades, finally free from the weight of trying to prove something everyone should have believed from the beginning. "I want to go home." Sarah nodded. "Then go home, Marcus. You earned it." The apartment in Fairborn felt too quiet without Emily. Marcus had known it would, had prepared for the silence by developing routines that filled hours without requiring another person. Morning runs, volunteering at the VFW, consulting work for Sterling that mostly involved reviewing test data and signing off on modifications he had designed years earlier. The money was good, better than good. The consulting contract had generated enough income to fully fund Emily's education, pay off the F-150's repairs, and start a savings account that might someday become a down payment on a house that wasn't full of memories about Victoria. Spring arrived in increments, the kind of seasonal shift that Ohio specialized in. 2 days of warmth followed by a week of cold, as if the state couldn't commit to anything, including weather. Marcus watched the trees outside his apartment window cycle through budding, the greens so bright it looked artificial against the gray sky. Emily called on Sundays, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone drowning in problem sets and lab reports. She was thriving in the way that involved regular panic about exams and occasional questioning of whether she belonged among people who had attended elite prep schools. You belong there because you earned it, not because of who your parents knew or how much money they donated. Easy for you to say. You're not the one taking differential equations from a professor who thinks failure builds character. Failure does build character, but so does success. You'll be fine. The calls usually lasted 20 minutes, enough time for Emily to download her week and for Marcus to provide the kind of parental reassurance that mostly involved listening and occasionally suggesting she sleep more than 4 hours per night. After they hung up, Marcus would sit with his coffee and Rebecca's photograph, the one he kept on the bookshelf next to the patent certificate. She would have been 50 this year, would have loved watching Emily navigate MIT, would have known exactly what to say to Victoria if they had ever met. You would have seen through her immediately. The photograph didn't answer, but Marcus felt the presence of something that wasn't quite memory and wasn't quite imagination. The sense that Rebecca was still part of their story, still shaping the man he was and the father he tried to be. The Air Force certification of the Pegasus engine happened in May, conducted at Edwards Air Force Base in California, where test pilots pushed prototypes to their operational limits and documented everything with the kind of precision that separated theoretical engineering from actual aircraft. Marcus flew out on a commercial flight, the first time in 30 years he had been on an airplane as a passenger, rather than the person who designed the engines keeping it aloft. The test pilot was a major named Sarah Kincaid, a woman who had logged 4,000 hours in military aircraft, and had the kind of confidence that came from repeatedly trusting her life to machines that occasionally failed. She shook Marcus's hand with a grip that suggested she could probably fly the plane manually if the engines quit. Your design is impressive on paper. Let's see if it works at Mach 0.9. The test run lasted 47 minutes, the Pegasus engine performing exactly as Marcus had calculated 4 years earlier. Fuel efficiency met specifications. Noise levels were 53% quieter than current generation engines. Thrust-to-weight ratio exceeded requirements. Major Kincaid landed the test aircraft and climbed out with a smile that Marcus recognized as the expression pilots wore when they'd just flown something extraordinary. That engine is a dream. Smooth, powerful, quiet. I've flown everything the Air Force has, and this is the best turbofan I've ever experienced. The Air Force Procurement Office issued final approval 2 weeks later. Sterling Aerospace received a contract to manufacture 60 Pegasus engines over the next 5 years, with options for an additional 40 if performance remained consistent. The total value was $3.2 billion. Richard Chen called Marcus personally to share the news. We couldn't have done this without you. I know that sounds like corporate nonsense, but it's true. The Air Force trusted this engine because your name was on it. I just designed it. You built it. And you stayed in the fight when most people would have walked away. That matters. Marcus hung up and looked out his apartment window at Fairborn, at the ordinary Ohio town that had been his home through marriage and widowhood, through triumph and betrayal, through losing everything and finding out what was actually worth keeping. His phone buzzed. Emily, texting instead of calling. Dad, I got a summer internship at Boeing, Propulsion Engineering Division. They said they wanted to work with someone who came from the Brennan School of Design. Marcus typed back, Your mom would be proud. I'm proud. The response was immediate. Love you. Call Sunday? Always. The VFW fundraiser committee presented Marcus with a check on a Saturday in June, the total climbing to $42,000 through donations that had continued even after Emily's MIT costs were covered. Commander Peterson handed over the oversized ceremonial check in front of 70 veterans who had shown up to a potluck dinner that smelled like casseroles and cheap beer. This is more than we raised. Emily's scholarship covered her tuition, so put it toward next year, or save it for when she goes to graduate school, or use it to buy a truck that doesn't sound like it's dying every time you start it. Laughter rippled through the hall. Marcus looked at faces weathered by deployments and decades, people who understood that some fights weren't about winning, but about refusing to quit. I don't know what to say except, thank you. You showed up when it mattered, and that's something I'll never forget. Peterson's expression was gruff with emotion he'd spent 50 years learning to hide. We take care of our own, Brennan. That's what we do. The potluck dinner extended into the kind of evening where veterans told stories that were half truth and half mythology, where the beer flowed freely enough that nobody should have been driving, where Marcus felt the weight of belonging to something larger than himself. He stayed until 2200, helping clean up and stack chairs, then drove home through streets that were familiar enough that he could navigate them half asleep. The apartment was dark and quiet. He sat on the couch without turning on lights, feeling the exhaustion of a day spent with people who mattered. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Brennan. Mr. Brennan, this is Lieutenant Colonel Vance. We met at Wright-Patterson during your testimony about the Pegasus engine. Marcus sat up straighter, muscle memory from 16 years of military service kicking in automatically. Yes, ma'am. I remember. I'm calling because I've been asked to assemble a review panel for the next generation of strategic airlift engines. The Air Force is looking at radical redesigns for the 2030s, and we need engineers who can think beyond incremental improvements. I appreciate the consideration, but I'm a consultant now. I don't do full-time positions. This wouldn't be full-time. It would be quarterly meetings in Washington, technical reviews, maybe some prototype evaluation. $50,000 per year, plus travel expenses. The offer hung between them, carrying implications Marcus was too tired to fully process. Can I think about it? Take your time. I'll send you the project brief. Read it, see if it interests you. No pressure. The call ended. Marcus sat in darkness, holding a phone that kept offering him futures he hadn't imagined when he signed divorce papers in a conference room that smelled like expensive leather and betrayal. Vosé's photograph was barely visible in the shadows, but he could see enough to remember the way she used to say that endings were just transitions, that every door closing meant another one opening, that loss and opportunity were often the same thing wearing different masks. I think I'm ready to stop fighting now. The photograph didn't answer, but the silence that followed felt less like absence and more like permission. Victoria Sterling's incarceration at FCI Alderson in West Virginia began in April, the federal facility designed for minimum security offenders who posed no flight risk and no danger to others. She was inmate 47392-019, a number that replaced the identity she had spent 45 years building. The routine was brutal in its monotony. Wake at 0600. Breakfast in a cafeteria that smelled like industrial cleaning products. Work assignment in the prison library, reshelving books that other inmates read to pass time that stretched endlessly. Lunch, recreation, dinner. Lights out at 2200. No executive suite, no board meetings, no decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. Just time, measured in increments so small they became torture. She had written to Marcus 14 times in the first 6 months. Letters that started angry, evolved into bargaining, and eventually devolved into pleas for understanding that she knew would never come. She had asked for money for the commissary account, for books, for anything that might make the days pass faster. Marcus had burned every letter without opening them. Adrian visited once, bringing news that Sterling Aerospace was thriving under Richard Chen's leadership, that the Pegasus contract had been expanded, that Marcus Brennan's name was becoming synonymous with integrity in the defense engineering community. Victoria listened to the update with the expression of someone watching their legacy be rewritten without them, then asked a question that surprised both of them. Is he happy? Adrian considered the question, thought about Marcus walking out of the courthouse after sentencing, about the man who had chosen to drop the civil suit rather than extend the conflict. I think he's at peace, which might be better than happy. Victoria returned to her cell that night and stopped writing letters. The acceptance was slow, measured in the same incremental time that defined everything in federal prison. She had spent her career building things and tearing down anyone who threatened what she built. She had married a good man and destroyed him because she couldn't separate value from ownership. And now she was a number in a facility surrounded by razor wire, serving time for crimes that seemed obvious in hindsight and incomprehensible when she committed them. The only question that mattered was whether she would learn anything from the fall. The 1-year anniversary of the Air Force hearing arrived without fanfare. Marcus marked it privately, noting the date on a calendar that tracked Emily's semester schedule and his consulting deadlines. 365 days since he had stood at a whiteboard and proved that the work Victoria claimed was hers had always been his. Emily was home for summer break, working her Boeing internship remotely from the apartment because Seattle housing was expensive, and she preferred spending time with her father to living with roommates who partied until 0300. She was taller somehow, more confident, shaped by 8 months at MIT into someone who looked like Rebecca and talked like an engineer. They celebrated the anniversary by not talking about it, making dinner together, and watching a documentary about the Wright brothers that felt appropriately symbolic for people who lived in Dayton and believed that flight was both literal and metaphorical. Dad, Boeing wants to hire me full-time after graduation. Starting salary is $95,000 plus benefits. Emily's voice carried the kind of tentative pride that teenagers used when they wanted approval but feared seeming boastful. That's exceptional. What did you tell them? That I wanted to finish my degree first, but it's good to know I have options. Marcus thought about his own career, 28 years at one company because loyalty had seemed like a virtue and job hopping had seemed like failure. Emily's generation understood what he was learning too late, that loyalty only mattered when it was reciprocal. Always have options. Companies are loyal to their bottom line. You should be loyal to your future. Is that what you learned from Victoria? I learned a lot of things from Victoria. Most of them were painful. But yeah, that was one of the lessons. Emily pulled her knees to her chest, a gesture from childhood that meant she was processing something complicated. Do you ever regret marrying her? The question deserved honesty. I regret trusting her with more than she deserved. But if I hadn't married her, I wouldn't have learned what I'm capable of when everything gets stripped away. So no, I don't regret it. I just wish it had cost less. Did it cost too much? Marcus looked at his daughter, brilliant and kind, navigating MIT and Boeing internships with the same determination Rebecca had shown fighting cancer until the biology became impossible. You're at MIT on a full scholarship. I have work I believe in. Victoria's in prison. The Pegasus engine is saving lives. No, it didn't cost too much. The documentary continued, showing grainy footage of the first flight at Kitty Hawk, a moment that lasted 12 seconds and changed human history. Marcus wondered if the Wright brothers had known they were beginning something that would lead to jet engines and stealth aircraft and engineers like himself who spent careers making flight safer. Probably, they just wanted to fly. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in September. Official government letterhead from the Defense Contract Management Agency. Marcus opened it standing at his mailbox, the Ohio heat making the paper stick to his fingers. Dear Mr. Brennan, in recognition of your significant contributions to military aviation propulsion systems, and in acknowledgement of the circumstances surrounding patent 11247-893A, the DCMA has authorized a special recognition award in the amount of $50,000. This award is granted pursuant to 10 U.S.C. Section 2374, which allows for monetary recognition of individuals who make exceptional contributions to defense technology development despite personal hardship. The coincidence was almost poetic. $50,000, the exact amount Victoria had paid Derek Chen to sabotage the Pegasus engine, the same amount Kyle Novak had been offered to destroy Marcus's reputation. Asset forfeiture had seized Victoria's payment to Chen. The DCMA award was separate, independent, arrived through channels that had nothing to do with criminal proceedings. But the symmetry felt intentional, like the universe was balancing accounts with mathematical precision. Marcus called Sarah Mitchell, who had handled the legal aspects of his consulting contract and had become something close to a friend in the way that people do when they navigate crises together. Did you know about this, the DCMA award? I might have submitted some paperwork on your behalf. Hypothetically. Sarah. You deserved recognition. The Air Force got an engine that performs better than anything in their current fleet. You got your name on a patent and a consulting contract. But you never got compensated for the years Victoria stole, for the emotional damage, for having to fight for credit you should have received automatically. So you applied for an award. I made a case that your contributions to national defense warranted recognition. The DCMA agreed. Cash the check, Marcus. He deposited the check the next day, watching his savings account balance climb to a number that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. The money sat there, possibility waiting to be transformed into decisions. Emily texted that evening. Boeing increased their offer, $110,000 starting salary. Marcus typed back, take it. but finish MIT first. The response was immediate. Obviously, I'm not dropping out when I'm this close to graduating. He smiled at his phone, at the daughter who had inherited Rebecca's determination and his own stubborn belief that finishing what you started mattered more than shortcuts. The $50,000 from the DCMA could fund a lot of things: a down payment on a house, investment in retirement accounts that were embarrassingly underfunded for a man approaching 53, a safety net for the inevitable moment when consulting work dried up and he needed to figure out what came next. Or it could become something else entirely. Marcus pulled up the VFW fundraiser committee's contact information and started typing an email. The VFW Scholarship Fund was established in November, funded with the DCMA award and administered by a committee that Commander Peterson assembled from veterans who understood what it meant to fight for opportunities that shouldn't require fighting. The criteria were simple: children of veterans who demonstrated academic excellence and financial need. The award amount was $10,000 per year, renewable for 4 years. 5 students would receive funding annually. The announcement was made at the Thanksgiving potluck, the hall packed with veterans and their families, the smell of turkey competing with the usual scent of beer and nostalgia. Peterson read the details while Marcus stood in the back, uncomfortable with attention he hadn't sought. This scholarship exists because Marcus Brennan decided that going through hell should mean something beyond his own recovery. It exists because he believes other veterans' kids deserve the same chance Emily got. Applause filled the hall. Marcus felt heat creep up his neck, the familiar discomfort of recognition he didn't know how to process. Emily stood beside him, home from MIT for the holiday, her hand on his arm. "You're ridiculous. You know that, right?" "I'm just paying it forward." "You're giving away $50,000. I'm investing it in people who need it. There's a difference." The first scholarship recipient was a 17-year-old girl whose father had been killed in Iraq, whose mother worked 2 jobs to keep their family housed. She was going to Ohio State to study engineering, following a path that Marcus recognized as the one Rebecca had wanted to walk before cancer rewrote her story. The girl approached Marcus after the announcement, her eyes red from crying. "Thank you. I didn't know how I was going to afford college. Just promise me you'll finish. And when you're successful, help the next person who needs it. I promise." The weight of her promise settled onto shoulders that had carried too much for too long. But this weight was different. This was the kind of burden that felt like purpose. Winter arrived with Ohio's characteristic aggression, temperatures dropping below freezing and staying there for weeks. Marcus's consulting work with Sterling wound down as the Pegasus engine moved into full production, his role shrinking from active engineering to occasional review of modification proposals. He was okay with that. Richard Chen had offered to transition him to full-time employment, a position that would come with benefits and stability and the kind of corporate structure Marcus had spent 28 years navigating. He had declined politely, explaining that he was done with buildings that smelled like expensive coffee and meetings that could have been emails. "What will you do instead?" "Figure it out as I go. Maybe teach, maybe consult on other projects. Maybe take a year and just be a father whose daughter is graduating from MIT." Chen had nodded, understanding the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting battles you never wanted. "The door's always open if you change your mind." "I appreciate that, but I think I'm ready for a different kind of door." Emily graduated from MIT on a Sunday in May, the ceremony held on Killian Court with parents crammed into folding chairs that were wildly uncomfortable and completely worth it. Marcus sat between a couple from California whose son was graduating with a degree in computer science, and a single mother from Georgia whose daughter was the first in their family to attend college. They shared stories while waiting for the ceremony to begin, the kind of casual intimacy that happens when strangers are united by pride in their children. The California father was a tech executive. The Georgia mother was a nurse. Marcus was an engineer who had spent the last 3 years fighting for his integrity. What does your daughter want to do after graduation? Emily starting at Boeing in July. Propulsion engineering, following in your footsteps. Marcus thought about his career, about the engines he had designed and the company that had tried to erase his name from his work. She's making her own footsteps. I'm just glad I get to watch. The graduates filed in wearing black robes, the kind of solemn processional that universities had perfected over centuries. Emily was somewhere in the middle of the line, her mortar board slightly crooked, her expression oscillating between pride and terror at the future that was starting in 6 weeks. The commencement speaker was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist who talked about failure and persistence, about how the most important discoveries came from people who refused to quit when the obvious path forward disappeared. Marcus listened with half attention, more focused on watching Emily scan the crowd until she found him, and smiled. Rebecca should be here. The thought arrived without warning, sharp with grief that time had muted but never eliminated. She should be watching her daughter graduate from MIT, should be planning celebration dinners and offering advice about navigating Boeing's corporate culture, should be alive. But she wasn't. And Marcus had learned that honoring her memory meant continuing forward rather than staying frozen in loss. Emily's name was called. She walked across the stage, shook hands with the university president, accepted a diploma that represented 4 years of problem sets and lab reports and panic attacks about differential equations. The California couple applauded for her like she was their own daughter. The Georgia mother whistled. Marcus just watched, feeling something in his chest that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite joy, but existed somewhere between them. She had made it. They had made it. The celebration dinner was at a restaurant near campus, expensive enough that Marcus felt guilty about the bill, but not guilty enough to choose somewhere cheaper. Emily ordered wine despite being underage, the waiter not checking ID because this was Massachusetts, and MIT graduates were presumed to have earned drinking rights. To surviving MIT, Marcus raised his water glass. To thriving at MIT, there's a difference. Fair point. To thriving, then. They clinked glasses, the sound delicate against the background noise of other families celebrating other graduates. Emily set down her wine and studied her father with the kind of assessment that meant she was about to ask something serious. Are you happy, Dad? The question was larger than it seemed. I'm at peace, which might be better. That's what someone told Victoria when she asked about you. Emily's voice was careful, the tone of someone revealing information they weren't supposed to have. How do you know what Victoria asked? MIT has a pretty good library. Prison correspondence is public record if you know where to look. She wrote you 14 letters. You never responded. Marcus felt old anger stir, then settle back into dormancy. There was nothing she could say that would change what happened. She asked if you were happy. Adrian told her you were at peace. And that bothered you? Emily swirled wine in her glass, watching the liquid catch the candlelight. I just wonder if peace is enough. If you're allowed to want more after everything you've been through. Marcus thought about the question, about the life he had built from wreckage, about mornings that no longer felt like endurance tests, and evenings that didn't require alcohol to become bearable. Peace is what I needed. Maybe someday I'll want more, but right now, watching you graduate from MIT, knowing the Pegasus engine is keeping pilots safe, having work that matters, and money to help other veterans' kids, that feels like more than enough, even without someone to share it with. The question hung between them, gentle but insistent. Your mother was irreplaceable. I'm not looking for a replacement. I didn't say replacement. I said someone. Someday, maybe. But not yet. Emily nodded, accepting the answer because she understood that grief had its own timeline, and pushing it served no purpose. Okay, but when you're ready, you're allowed to be happy, not just at peace. The drive back to Ohio took 12 hours, the reverse journey of the trip they had made 3 years earlier, with Emily's belongings packed in the F-150's truck bed. Now the truck carried her diploma, a box of textbooks she couldn't bear to sell, and photographs of friends she had promised to stay in touch with. They stopped at the same rest area in Pennsylvania, drinking the same bad coffee. The symmetry felt intentional, like they were completing a circle that had begun with fear and hope and was ending with accomplishment and possibility. You nervous about Boeing? Terrified. What if I'm not good enough? What if MIT was the easy part? MIT was definitely not the easy part, and you're good enough. You just have to trust that the people hiring you know what they're looking for. Did you feel that way when you started at Sterling? Marcus thought about his younger self, 24 and fresh out of the Air Force, believing that competence and loyalty would be rewarded in proportion to their value. I felt like I could design anything if someone gave me the chance. It took me a long time to learn that not everyone values the same things. What do you value? Work that matters, people who keep their promises, the chance to build something that lasts longer than I do. That's a good list. It's an honest list. They reached Fairborn as the sun set, the Ohio sky turning colors that Rebecca used to call God showing off. The apartment felt smaller with Emily's presence filling it again, the way adult children occupied space differently than teenagers. She would leave for Seattle in 6 weeks. The apartment would be quiet again. Marcus would figure out what came next, would navigate the space between peace and happiness, would continue building a life that honored everything he had lost and everything he had gained. But for now, he made dinner while Emily unpacked, and the silence was comfortable rather than empty. Some victories weren't about defeating enemies. They were about surviving long enough to see your daughter graduate from MIT, to have work that mattered, to understand that integrity wasn't a cost you paid, it was the foundation everything else was built on. And Marcus Brennan, 53 years old and finally at peace, had built something worth keeping.